3 minutes after 10 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where for the 7 millionth time in the last few months or years, I find myself wondering how far we should go this morning. How far... yesterday we flirted with the F word for much of an hour, discussing government pressure being brought to bear on academic institutions teaching English literature. Yes, you heard me correctly. There's a semi-viral clip out there somewhere if you want to recap on the idea of an English government being opposed to the teaching of English literature. But when Liz Truss stood up in the House of Commons yesterday and justified her complete abandonment of principle, evidence and truth on the grounds of being a patriot, I'm afraid that the F word popped up once again in my mind. And we'll be having a proper look at that in the second hour of the programme today as things stand. Because in the first hour, I'd like you to talk about the issue that prompted Liz Truss to make such a potentially dangerous intervention or descent further into shame and horror. Because the Northern Ireland story it's a really weird one. I don't know. I don't think that I'm judging you or anything like that. I don't know how much of it you understand. And I don't know how many of us realise how important it is. It's really odd, isn't it? Because it's not that complicated, but for some reason we'd rather look away. Listen, I'm talking about myself, not about you. I think we suffer from a degree of intellectual laziness. Even those of us who like to have a good chat and a good discussion about current affairs and even perhaps the occasional heated debate. Sometimes the intellect, either you get emotionally exhausted, which is why talking about Roe versus Wade is a lot trickier than I would want it to be. I'm fairly clear, I'm entirely clear on what my views are, but I just find even the acknowledgement of people who hate humans, unless they are not quite humans yet, in which case apparently they're the most important creatures on the planet and must be protected at all costs, even to the detriment of a mother's life. I just find that such a depressing worldview. Oh, let the refugees drown, let the immigrants die in the back of lorries, but we care passionately about human life that isn't actually human life yet. Do you see what I mean? It's already a mess. And we're not even talking about it today. So you get the emotional exhaustion on some subjects, and then there's a sort of form of intellectual laziness. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, there's not a lot in the news today. It's not a lot that we could talk about instead, even if I were to succumb, as I would do a little later in the week when my energy levels begin to dip. I'd succumb to the temptation to talk about something less complicated or even perhaps less important. But I can't, not least because I was in Ireland recently. And I have to tell you that I don't know what it's like in other countries. We must do this soon as a phone-in because we haven't done it for a while. They just think we're crackers. You don't even have the sort of idiots like Brexit hardman Steve Baker or Ian Duncan Smith in the room in Irish politics. They're just looking through an absolutely clear lens at what's going on in the United Kingdom, with particular interest, of course, in what's happening in Northern Ireland. And they're just looking at us now, in a sense, in a state of complete wonder. Hey, I interviewed on RTE, the big Irish broadcasting network, and it's a very different experience from talking about Brexit or Britain in Britain. It's as if I felt like I was an exhibit in a safari park at times. It's as if they sort of ask, what's going on over there? What on earth are you doing? I do a little bit of Irish. It's pretty much the only media I do outside this studio these days. I do a little bit of Irish media, and I essentially get asked the same question all the time. What's going on? How can this country have become so detached from reality so quickly? How has this decline been achieved in such a short period of time? And what on earth is that ludicrous man-child doing in Downing Street? Do they understand the jeopardy in which they're putting the Good Friday Agreement? Do they even begin to grasp the importance of the Northern Irish Protocol or the fact that it is largely popular among the people of Northern Ireland? They just look at us as if, I think Safari Park is probably the best thing I can come up. No, it's not quite right, is it? They see me like a guide to a safari park or to a sort of freak show. They think I'll be able to explain to them the metaphorical bearded lady that is Brexit. It just doesn't make any sense to anybody sensible. And it's heading in that direction here, of course, as the reality begins to emerge. And the ludicrous Minister for Brexit Opportunities isn't even pretending anymore that there are any. He's just coming up with absolute bilge. But I digress. It's 8 minutes after 10. So I've done it a few times, and I feel it would be a little bit simplistic to do it again. Why is it so important, and what is happening are the questions that are going to underpin the next hour. But here's how I see it, and you can then use that as a starting point. Obviously, if you're listening in Northern Ireland or you have connections to Northern Ireland or the island of Ireland. In fact, yes, a special mention to people in the Republic, actually, about what you think is happening. We don't hear that often enough in the British media. It's your island, essentially, that is being jeopardised by our ridiculous government. And you don't even, another example of the madness. You don't have to be a sort of moaning Minnie or a member, whatever they're calling us this week. Is it woke or Ramona or whatever it is, whatever word they use in order to avoid saying, yes, all of those people who've been proved absolutely right about everything. When they start calling us that, then hopefully we can start fixing the mess that they've made. But for now, we're still woke or Ramonas or whatever it is. You've got members of the Conservative Party queuing up yesterday to describe what they did in the House of Commons in the most dismal of terms. It is actually incredible. So what did they do? Well, they voted to give themselves the power to abandon the negotiated terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Listen, I'm doing my best at 10 past 10. Anything I get wrong is not a mistake as such in the traditional sense of the word. Think of it more as an invitation to ring in and correct me. Okay, so 0345 606 0973. So the reason I have this slightly spluttering delivery on mornings like this is because when I say the words out loud, I can't believe that it's happening. And not only can I not quite believe that it's happening, but I can't believe that it's happening in plain sight. And that's why when I say, if I've got anything wrong, please ring me, there's a 48% of me that's going, oh, please ring me. I really hope I'm wrong. And 52% of me, to employ the infernal ratio, 52% of me is obviously going, I don't think you are, mate. I think it is as bad as it looks. So let's run through it chronologically. First of all, they told us that absolutely no threat would be posed to the island of Ireland or the Good Friday Peace Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, by Brexit. And we said to them, that doesn't really make sense, because if you pull out of the single market and the customs union, and even now, I've got a slight confusion or conflation about those two institutions. But if you pull out of the customs union or the single market or both, because you don't want to abide by their rules anymore, which became sometime after the referendum the claim that they were making, we need to get out of that regulatory framework, then you will not be able to have the Good Friday Agreement in place, which, of course, was responsible for the removal of a land border on the island of Ireland, because you'll have to have some membrane through which goods pass so that it can be checked that they abide by the rules of the territory you're moving into. And we explained this. And people like Jacob Rees-Mogg insisted we were wrong, or that Owen Paterson would say that technological solutions would come up, or that there would be an answer to the question, but it went to a different school. I think they claimed that at one point. There's definitely a solution to the problem you're describing, you pesky metropolitan elite Ramonas, but I can't tell you what it is because it goes to a different school. I think that became government policy under Theresa May, who even more oddly and madly was one of the few politicians to directly describe the threat to the Good Friday Agreement, but that was before she became Prime Minister, not after. So we explained, or not even, stop me so smug, James, it was explained that regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland was a key requirement of the Good Friday Agreement, and that pulling out of the single market, pulling Northern Ireland out of the single market and the customs union would jeopardise that. And it was pooh-poohed. And I'm reaching out now to people who possibly felt that they were supporting the clever people over the last few years. It was pooh-poohed, and you were told it was nonsense, and it was all inflammatory or Project Fear or ignorant, or we didn't understand what was happening, and then it all came true. All of it. Every single bit of it. Because the only way that Boris Johnson could get Brexit over the line was by doing something that he previously described it being impossible for any British Prime Minister to contemplate doing it. And then he did it. This is what I mean about when I say it out loud, when I give you the chronology, I can't quite believe this is my country. So the man who said we could never ever do that, no British Prime Minister could ever contemplate doing that, he did it. Not only did he do it, but he did it after standing up in Northern Ireland, admittedly after a few sherries, judging by the footage, but by standing up in Northern Ireland and promising Northern Irish business people that he would not do it. Indeed, deploying the phrase, I think, over my dead body, which is about as extreme as a politician can get, isn't it? That over my dead body will a border be introduced in the Irish Sea. You see what I mean about saying it out loud and not quite believing that it's happening in our country? Because then he did it. He put a border in the Irish Sea. This was agreed in the negotiations conducted by a man called David Frost, who was a very, very mediocre civil servant before leaving the civil service to take up a job at the Scotch Whisky Association, where he campaigned and spoke quite persuasively about how insane it would be for the Scotch whisky industry in particular, but trade for United Kingdom in general, to leave the single market and the customs union. He actually made some sense back then, David Frost. Obviously, when he was speaking sense, he wasn't getting commissioned by the Daily Telegraph to write ludicrous comment pieces or elevated into the House of Lords by a Conservative Prime Minister, because he was speaking sense about Brexit. And then he got, I don't know, dazzled, seduced, call it what you will, and he went in to negotiate on the British government's behalf. And he signed up to something called the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was a way of ensuring regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland while allowing the rest of the United Kingdom to pull out of all of the requirements of single market and customs union membership. He signed it. Boris Johnson signed it. Frost negotiated it. He got a peerage for his troubles. This is just what happened. These are not opinions. This is just counting. These are the facts of the matter. He got a peerage for his troubles. And then almost immediately he started complaining about what he'd signed. And Boris Johnson started describing it in increasingly dismissive and derisory terms, culminating mere months after the thing was signed, while the ink was still wet, the then Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Brandon Lewis, standing up and saying that the government was prepared to break international law in a very limited and specific manner. Now, by breaking international law, they were contemplating abandoning the terms of the treaty that they had only just signed. The ink was wet. At this point, the DUP have a fit of what is called in Northern Ireland the heebie-jeebies. They have a fit of the heebie-jeebies because goods coming into Belfast are going through a process that is different from the process gone through by goods going into Birmingham, coming from, let's say, London. So London to Birmingham, piece of cake. It used to be the same across the whole of Europe. Now we've put up barriers. So London to Belfast becomes problematic because you've got to check these goods in order to ensure that they don't compromise the regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland, which is a key support structure of the whole Good Friday Agreement, right? So this is what they did. This was the oven-ready deal. This was get Brexit done. Still needs explaining, doesn't it? It's still not landed with people. This is the oven-ready deal, the one that they're tearing up, the one that they stood up in Parliament yesterday and literally voted to abandon. So they lied to you then, and they're lying to you now. It's quite incredible, absolutely incredible. Look, these texts, they don't really annoy me anymore. They just make me want to weep. Ha ha, you can't do anything about it. This is someone who's been lied to and still doesn't understand it. Ha ha, you can't do anything about it because we got an 80-seat majority Democratic mandate in the general election from the GB public. I mean, that's just gibberish. Absolute gibberish, but it's Boris Johnson's core support. People who don't understand anything, and that goes right up to the Secretary of State for Culture and beyond. They do not understand anything, but they think that if they just wave their flag a little more violently, then the world will turn into the world that they not only want to live in, but also can understand. If I just wave my flag a little harder, maybe I'll start understanding things. Because I hate not understanding things. I hate not being clever enough to understand how little I understand. So now they're tearing it up. Why are they tearing it up? Because the DUP don't like it. But here's the kicker. The people in Northern Ireland, actual measurable metrics, trade, economy, it's working out pretty well. It needs a tweak, it needs a bit of movement, but it's working out pretty well. And if they can't form a government, if there's no government in place within 6 months, then the British government calls another election. And the DUP, which is worried about support leaching to even more extremist politicians, not leaching so much to the middle, that's not their concern chiefly, they're probably not going to go into government, even though they see yesterday's vote as a win for them. So what happens next? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What happens next? Predictions, forecasts, understandings, explanations, anything you've got. And begin by picking apart my analysis, because that is the scariest thing of all. It's all happening in plain sight. And just to knit together those three simple salient points from your man here who you can't do anything about it. They lied to you. I understood it was a lie. You fell for it. And you're still celebrating and you still think they're on your side. So it wasn't oven ready. They didn't get Brexit done. They're abandoning the treaty that they signed. They're lying about the concept of necessity in UK law. They're not telling you where they got the legal advice from that says this is okay. I think those lawyers go to a different school because all the ones I can find say that we are breaking international law. And they're doing it to appease the DUP, which history has taught us is almost impossible. Well, is actually impossible to do. So what happens next? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Seriously, anything you've got, because, well, it's not pretty, is it? 21 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So when I say what happens next, I'm not going to hold you to it. I'm not going to come round your house and demand a refund if that's not what happens. I suppose I'm asking, what are the possible paths ahead now? The British government has essentially pledged to break or given itself powers to break international law, to abandon the terms of the treaty that got it elected. What are the paths ahead? And I think perhaps what's the word I want? The intransigence of the DUP is perhaps the area in which I need the most help, or the potential or the perceived intransigence of the DUP. And I might do this today. Please don't take advantage of my good nature, but I might read out some of it because these people are never going to ring me again. It should have been no deal. I need to check the number to see if that's the same number as the last idiot. But people still saying that. These people who understand nothing. Boris Johnson announced last week or earlier this week that they're poised to break World Trade Organization rules. It's why his own ethics advisor resigned. So that's what you were cheering. World Trade Organization rules will be fine. You don't understand anything. And the days of being polite to you or contempt for the conmen, compassion for the conned, they're over. If you haven't seen the light by now, you're never going to. And my job is merely to point out to you how stupid you are, which I'm not going to lie, I quite enjoy doing. 22 minutes after 10 is the time. It's a living. Joe's in Dublin. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you? Hopefully you won't be pointing out how stupid I am.
Well, hopefully, Joe, but I'm an equal opportunities insulter. Go on.
So I suppose I just wanted to make the point, James, just on Brexit and how the whole thing has unfolded. If you go back to kind of summer 2016 or even before that, how it unfolded was entirely predictable to everyone on the island of Ireland, possibly with the exception of the DUP. When you think about, someone like Theresa Villiers, how entirely ignorant she was of her portfolio, but she was kept in place.
God, yeah,
Karen Bradley thinking that, a Sinn Féin deputy would be walking down the Shankill Road looking for votes and vice versa. That's the equivalent of, an Agri minister not knowing that beef comes from cows.
Yeah, or a Brexit minister not knowing that Calais and Dover was quite an important crossing for international trade. But there was a particular, obviously there was an ignorance of the EU, but there was a particular ignorance of Northern Ireland as well, and I think it was a willful ignorance.
And I suppose
let's pick up on the word willful, because Karen Bradley was put there by Theresa May. She was there in 2018, and she actually said out loud that she didn't understand that nationalists don't vote for unionists and unionists don't vote for nationalists, which I think can be loosely described as the single most elementary fact about Northern Ireland politics, right?
Yep.
So how does that land? Because in London, I mean, it got picked up. It was in the House magazine that she said this. So she wasn't even aware of what a crazy thing it was to say, or even to think. Because if she'd understood what a stupid thing it was to say, she actually wouldn't have said it. She'd have kept silent about the fact that she thought it. Do you see what I mean?
I do, and it's strange though, because your reaction was was rightly one of outrage and contempt that someone so ignorant of their portfolio was in place.
Yes.
But there was no outrage on Ireland. There was ridicule, and that was it.
Yeah.
And because we expected it, we've seen this for generations,
hundreds of years.
But I mean, going back to what's currently happening,
right?
I suppose I just want to make the point that with regards to the Irish Sea border, there has always been or certainly in the last 20, 30 years, with regards to checks on agriculture and animals, for example. So that there has always been a sea border. It has obviously become greater, more enhanced lately, but it has always existed. So it was entirely obvious to everyone on this island, I believe.
Yeah.
Certainly, I remember speaking to my friends 2016, 2017. We all knew what was going to happen when we saw Boris Johnson, as you alluded to, as you mentioned earlier. When we saw Boris Johnson with the glass of sherry, we really couldn't believe
over my dead body, and you knew, and I knew, and everybody understanding things knew that it was impossible to do what he was saying. Literally impossible. The only people who didn't understand that were either the professionally stupid or Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is just a source of never-ending mystery, I think, to sentient human beings.
Yeah, no, completely, and I think I think what most people on this island feel is that the only purpose of Brexit has been to get Boris Johnson in power. It hasn't served any other purpose. And I know there's
Brexit in terms of that deal, not in terms of the referendum vote necessarily, but in terms of that ludicrous deal negotiated by David Frost and now attempting to be disowned by literally everybody involved with it. It got them over the line. It got them into Downing Street with an 80-seat majority because people believed that it would somehow be the end of the matter and it would be a resolution and a solution, when of course it was none of the above.
I actually see it more as almost as a not quite a hostile takeover, but a takeover of the Tory government, which Karen Bradley was bad enough, Theresa Villiers was bad enough to begin with. But I was looking at a link over the weekend and I saw that only 6 cabinet members in 2016 were pro leaving the EU, and of the 6, I would guess most of them said, that we would stay in the single market or we'd stay in the customs union. I would hazard a guess. I know Michael Gove certainly did. And now you've gone from an absurd case where you had only 6 who essentially wanted a soft Brexit to now having 100% of the cabinet who wanted a hard Brexit, who wanted a no-deal Brexit, which they constantly threatened, and the EU literally never threatened once.
And what's the chops? Liz Truss now saying that anyone who points this out and questions what the hell you're playing at is somehow not a patriot, which was the other bit. You've taken me up to the wire, Joe. What happens next?
I think really briefly, James. I think this government is trying to move a little bit almost into the Fox News realm, where their role isn't to properly legislate for issues; it's just to fight culture wars. And I don't think that what was passed yesterday, I don't think they'll ever act upon it. It's similar. Just if I can, one last thing. About a month ago, they passed a law which meant that a non-Irish EU citizen couldn't cross the border without a permit. Impossible to police with with 300 border crossings. No member of the PSNI in a million years would ever consider policing it. They wasted their time passing it. They've wasted their time passing this, and they'll waste their time passing more meaningless legislation.
You know what? I'll tell you, a mark of how mad things have become. I hope you're right, and I hope that this is meaningless legislation with no intention of ever being implemented and designed entirely to throw red meat towards the DUP and or so-called Brexiters who still don't understand anything about anything and are somehow, and this is the bit that confuses me, and I wish you'd still call me. If I promise not to clip it up and make you famous, would you ring me then? You know, if you're not going to be all over YouTube with millions of views all laughing at you, if I promise not to clip it up, would you ring me then and tell me how you possibly reconcile the fact that everything you told me a few years ago was going to happen hasn't happened, and everything I told you was going to happen has happened, and yet you're still cheering for the people that lied to you? That's the bit I don't get. And that's the bit that I need to understand, because until we break that spell, we can't start fixing the mess that you've made. 0345 606 0973 is the number that you need. I'm going to talk to Mark Drakeford after the news about a fascinating new initiative that's being introduced in Wales, where they're having a proper look at basic income. It's not universal basic income because they're not giving it to everybody, but they're having a proper look at the notion of a basic income, which we've talked about on this programme, and cleverer people than me suggested that it is going to have to form some sort of part of our economic future in anything that is even remotely resembling a fair society. So the First Minister of Wales will be joining me after the news, which means if I can just find a way to talk about Scotland today, and given that the road to the next referendum appears to be laid out by Nicola Sturgeon, she's due to lay it out today, then that New Year's resolution I made back in January of doing a lot more with regard to the other nations of the United Kingdom, with regard to Scotland and to Wales and to Northern Ireland, this would be the best proof yet, I think, the best vindication yet of that New Year's resolution. But the time now is 10:30, and Dominic Ellis is here with your headlines. 33 minutes after 10 is the time. Back to Northern Ireland and the vexed question of what you think will happen next. I wonder whether Joe's analysis that the best case scenario is that the legislation passed yesterday, remarkably featuring many Conservative MPs who honestly and effectively articulated their belief that it breaks international law and then failed to vote against it. So Joe's analysis that the best thing we can hope for is that it is not intended ever to be enacted. If you've got something more optimistic than that, I'll give you the money myself. But we head next to Wales, where the government has launched an initiative that, well, I think it is borderline revolutionary. It's a basic income pilot. Well, I don't take my word for it. Let's get Mark Drakeford to explain it, the First Minister of Wales. Have you been called revolutionary before? Mark, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too, James. Probably not in a particularly positive way, but it is a radical plan. I definitely sign up to that. But we know that young people who leave the care system are amongst the most vulnerable young people in our society. They end up disproportionately represented in homelessness figures, in our custody system, in our mental health system. And what we are going to do is we're going to provide 500 young people leaving the care system in Wales over the next couple of years with a basic income sufficient to meet their daily needs on a reliable basis, so that they can plan their futures in a way that allows them to look to the long term rather than forever having to plan their lives on the basis of where will I be sleeping tonight? How will I get through the rest of it? And that is so destructive of those young people's futures. Well,
that before we get on to the detail of it, what happens to these people now? They leave care. It's almost like a cutting of an umbilical cord. And sometimes, of course, the care that they get is suboptimal, but it's a heck of a lot better than nothing. And then they reach their 18th birthday. Well, you tell me, what happens to them currently?
Well, they still get help through the services that have looked after them up until that date. But they have to rely for an income on the social security system. And as you know, that is bare bones and often designed to try and find a way of getting young people disqualified from the benefits they need rather than supporting them. So life is very tough indeed for young people who don't have a family to fall back on when those small things in life go wrong. We were talking with a young person just last week. If you're lucky enough to be someone with a family behind you, you've got a contract on a flat, it comes to an end, there's a fortnight's gap between that and the next flat, what do? you go home and you get looked after there. If you're a young person coming from care, that is an absolute crisis. You've got nowhere else to go. You end up on the streets, and with all the disasters that we know that follow.
£1,600 each per month for 2 years before tax, which is, I mean, to be topical, Mark, it's considerably more than you get as a junior barrister at the moment. What criteria did you use? How did the government arrive at that sum?
It's the real living wage. That's what it represents. And as a government, we promote the real living wage. We pay our own staff that, and we encourage our colleagues in other public services in Wales to do the same. And when we were thinking about what a basic income would be, what do you need to feed, to clothe, to house, to be able to take part in the life of the community around you, we thought the real living wage was the right way to pitch it. And
you mentioned the vulnerability of these young people. It cuts both ways, doesn't it? They're not just vulnerable to the vicissitudes of life without support, life without family or security. They're also vulnerable to exploitation. Are you not worried at all that this makes them more attractive targets for unsavoury types? If it's known that every care leaver is getting £1,600 a month before tax, then drug dealers and other criminals may up their efforts to ensnare them.
Look, that's a really important point. And I want to be clear that our pilot has two components to it. You get the income, but you also get the advice and the guidance and the adult support that you need in order to be able to make the best choices. Now, in any experiment, things can go wrong, and this is an experiment. So we will be watching very carefully for vulnerabilities that young people may have to exploitation. But some basic income pilots around the world are sort of, take the money and you're on your own pilots. You get the money, but after that, there's nothing else for you. Our pilot has the money, but it also has, the support, the guidance, the continued interest in the future of those young people that we think will mitigate some of those risks.
And do they continue to get the money if they find work, or forgive me, if they win the lottery? Do they still carry on getting the £1,600 a month?
They do. It's guaranteed for the 2 years, and it's unconditional as well. It doesn't depend on how you behave. Of course, we hope people will get work. The trouble for so many young care leavers is that they are forced into taking the first job they can get their hands on in order to survive, rather than being able to think of what their ambitions would be, where their talents lie, and to be able to plot a path into their future that makes the most of those abilities. So we hope it will prevent young people from being obliged to forget what they really want to do in order just to take the first thing that comes their way.
And finally, Mark Drakeford, what will success look like? How will you know whether it has worked or not?
Well, success for me will look like this, that we will have enabled those young people to make investment decisions. Decisions now that get them to where they want to be in the future. In that flat, in that job, on that college course, whatever it might be. And as a result, they will get better futures, James, but the taxpayer will end up not having to spend far bigger sums of money rescuing those young people's lives when they end up going off the rails. So success for me looks like a win on all sides, a win for those young people, but a win for the wider society as well.
And when does the first payment land? Has it started already, or is it in the coming days?
Starts on the 1st of July. So I met a couple of young people who will be in the very front of the queue because their birthdays happen at the start of July. And then over the 2-year period, as you become 18, so you will become eligible for the scheme.
Gosh. Mark Drakeford, many thanks indeed, and good luck with this, because I'll go with radical instead of revolutionary. It's a more digestible word, I think. Thank you very much, First Minister Mark Drakeford there with details of this new scheme launched today by the Welsh Government, and as you heard, kicking in on July the 1st, which is 30 days after September, April, June and November, 29, 30. Friday, is it? Or Thursday? Anyway, this week it starts, and the first payments will be made depending on when those birthdays land. Friday is July the 1st. More than 500 people leaving care in Wales will be offered £1,600 each. And some of these young people, I don't have specific knowledge or understanding of the Welsh situation, but I've spoken to kids who've left care in England, and the story, it's an odd story that stayed with me, was one young woman who had no cooking facilities in the digs that she found. So literally all she could eat was fast food. There was, I mean, she might have been able to put a microwave in the corner of her bedroom, but you'd need a few quid to buy a microwave. And if you're on universal credit or unemployment pay, I mean, it was a story. I thought that there would be a loophole or that it had been missed, but the social worker who was talking me through the detail explained that was absolutely how the system worked. There was no mistake, there was no loophole, there was no hole in the safety net through which she had fallen. That was how the system worked. And the Welsh Government, they're going very far and very fast in the opposite direction. I just thought you'd want to know about that, given that we hear so much about the mess that many politicians are making of everything. There's a genuine policy there designed, and you have to hope that it works, to help some of the people most in need of help and support from their government. 10:42 is the time. Back to governments that would struggle to be described in such terms, i.e. the English government, the same English government that is putting pressure on universities to stop teaching English literature, but which is also now almost boasting about its willingness to break international law, and in the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss's case, describing it as the thing a patriot would do. Why are you doing this? Why are you breaking international law, diminishing us on the world stage? And that's the analysis of Theresa May, by the way, the last Conservative Prime Minister, to which Liz Truss's answer is because she's a patriot. We'll work out what that means in the next hour of the programme. Back to the question of what's going to happen next, or indeed what is going on now. If my analysis has been inadequate, feel free to improve it. Martin is in Sunderland. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello,
the usual litany of stuff you regular callers give.
You don't have to. It's like a bingo sheet. You don't have to go through it.
It is indeed. You asked what's going to happen next.
Yes.
Well, I think probably the nightmare scenario as far as the Irish government is concerned is that the EU may have to impose border checks on mainland Europe. Because, as your previous caller articulately expressed, is that the Irish border, the border on Ireland, the British border on Ireland, is so porous that it is unpoliceable, it's ungovernable. You can cross the border overtaking on certain roads. Overtaking another car, you cross the border from the European Union, outside the European Union, should the protocol not be observed. Now, there appears to be no checks to stop any dodgy beef, dodgy chicken, dodgy fish, dodgy electrical goods, counterfeit goods coming in from Turkey, dodgy toys coming in from the Far East, from China, and there's nothing to stop that stuff then coming in across the border and flooding into the European Union unchecked if the protocol is repealed. And Irish food has such a high reputation, a high traceability value all across Europe, is that the Irish economy would collapse.
And this tallies actually with another story which Jacob Rees-Mogg has chosen to use to advertise his own ignorance. This is a report from, I think The Guardian reported it first, but all sorts of organisations, it's a report by the Food Standards Agency and the Food Standards Scotland saying that the UK is facing significant risks to the quality of food being imported and consumed.
Of course.
And then the worry becomes that if it's getting into the UK, then without checks in the Irish Sea, then it's going to get into the Republic of Ireland as well, via Northern Ireland. Of course.
If a container of food, for instance, is labelled in Turkey and it's labelled for Britain, there are no customs checks all the way across Europe, and it gets taken into Dover. Now, there appears to be no customs checks and stuff coming into Dover either, so therefore it enters the British market, and there's no traceability value with the stuff that comes out. It could be horse meat, it could be goat meat, it could be anything at all, and it could be relabelled in a factory here for use in Northern Ireland only. But that's not going to stop it coming across the border.
Well, that's the criminals are attracted to the lowest regulation territory.
Exactly.
So the fact that we're not doing the checks means that your lorry loads of dodgy Romanian meat are going to be making their way into the United Kingdom. This is what the Food Standards Agency is warning.
Exactly, and it has to be checked somewhere.
So what happens next then?
Well, what happens next is that the protocol, With Brandon Lewis, if he would just stop lying on television. I saw him being interviewed twice on Sunday morning, and he lied twice when he said that every.
Do you know, not long ago, I'd haul you up now. I'd say, you can't accuse them of lying. You can't do, but they just are. Mick Lynch, I think, made this point last week with reference to a completely different story. They are just lying all the time. Yeah.
But he said that every party in Northern Ireland was opposed to the protocol.
That's not true.
That's not true at all.
That's just not true.
And he was neither challenged. He wasn't challenged on Sky, and he wasn't challenged on BBC.
Well, that's partly because people in my line of work haven't got the knowledge that they should have of Northern Irish politics. And I know you'll be used to that over the years, but you'd have thought in the current climate, people had gone on a little bit of a crash course, even if it just involves downloading a few podcasts of this programme. To let a Northern Ireland minister say that unchallenged in a studio is dereliction of duty in the ugliest way.
It is. I mean, Brandon Lewis does know better. Of course he knows better. He's a government minister. So he chose to go down that course to explain his irrational actions.
Well, one of the weird things. Martin, thank you. You made me a little late for the break, but they do know better. I don't know whether this is people like Martin and me trying to comfort ourselves. It's what Hilary Benn was saying yesterday to Liz Truss. They do know better. And that's why when Liz Truss responded by saying, "No, I'm a patriot, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing," i.e. probably breaking international law, diminishing the United Kingdom's standing on the world stage and jeopardising the Good Friday Agreement. How have we reached a point where a Foreign Secretary can stand up in the House of Commons and describe doing those three things, not my analysis, Theresa May's, doing those three things as the actions of a patriot? That's kind of scary. We might be flirting with the F word again after 11 o'clock. 10:51 is the time. Everyone's a critic. Please ask James to stop banging, tapping, rumbling on his desk. I'm not even wearing my quality headphones, but it is like listening to the boom of distant shelling. It is unprofessional. Keith is applauding this. What do I do? What are the habits that he's referring to? What sort of thing is it? Well, like what, though? Because sometimes my tummy rumbles. I can't. I don't hit the microphone. Do I hit the microphone like that? All the time? Well, why has no one told me this before? Also, why are we doing this live on the radio? This is the sort of thing that should have come up in an appraisal or something like that, or in a post-show chat, lads. No? What, every day, would you say? With my nose or with my hands? Or you mean when I pull it towards me because I'm about to say something fascinating and brilliant? That one, where it's like a kind of that. Is that like that? And I go, I won't do it now because your man here who's not even got his quality headphones on. I'll have a hissy fit. All right, I'll try to be better. I'll tell you what. I'll go up to 11 o'clock with my arms folded and see if that improves things at all. Okay. Other texts that aren't really on message but are nonetheless diverting. This is from Julie. Morning, James. I know you have more important things to talk about, but if you could wish me a happy 50th birthday, I would be so grateful. I've been listening to LBC for over 15 years and have literally grown up listening to your show. Thank you for your voice of reason. Julie Bardwell, happy 50th birthday. Welcome to the club. It's not as bad as you feared. I've reached new levels of contentment and joy until it was pointed out to me that my microphone technique, even after all these years, is apparently appalling. I mean, crikey, I've got one job, really. That's not to abuse the microphone. And apparently, no. 10:53 is the time. Back to the Northern Irish question. Leslie's in Sligo. Leslie, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, whatever about banging on the desk, James, and greetings to you and your listeners. I literally threw my boot at the screen yesterday when I saw Liz Truss lying, and lying in Parliament and whatever. And she was talking about the vast majority of people are suffering because of the protocol. I mean, I live just 10 minutes from the border here, and God knows, if a border was to be reintroduced, we're back. We're back hundreds of years. It's just they don't want to. Well, sorry, just on the Liz Truss thing. I mean, it's like saying that the vast majority of people in the Ukraine, are welcoming the Russians in, and they're not happy. I mean,
you mean in terms of the scale of the dishonesty, not in terms of the crisis that's being faced by the island.
And the other genius talking from Bavaria about how there's a trade border in the Irish Sea. There isn't a trade border in the Irish Sea. In the sense that there's nothing is actually being harmed significantly. I mean,
there's a few delays, but there's not something you can't bring in.
Things have to be tweaked, but. By and large, everybody's happy with it.
Well, that's the impression I get, and I'd be happy to hear a dissenting voice on that one, because I think what we do, and Brexit is the very epitome of this, you're putting the intellectual up against the emotional, or the economic up against the emotional. So your DUP's motivation has absolutely nothing to do with efficacy of trade, fluidity of trade, or frictionless trade.
The great thing about the DUP, James, going forward, is that the vast majority of their voters are over 65. And on top of that, final negotiations
did we get that one as well? You've sworn twice now. I've had to dump two of your. I can't risk another one. Otherwise, you can't come on the radio and use language like that, Leslie. There's a P word and an F word there, and it wasn't fascism. Honestly, it's all going wrong today, and I've unfolded my arms now, Leslie. I've unfolded my arms because you. And Dan in Newcastle has texted to say, "Please unfold your arms. You sound belligerent." Liam's in Derry. Liam, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Just laughing there because he says it's very.
Don't repeat what he said. Don't repeat what he said. I don't know whether you can hear it. Can he hear it when he's on the phone? So you heard. This is just insane now. I said don't repeat the word that he said, and then you repeat. It's turning into an episode of Father Ted. This is what happens when I fold my arms. Are you happy now? This is what happens when I fold my arms. Right, Eddie's in Rochester. Last chance. I want to get through this programme without any dumpings or profanities. Eddie,
Right.
Hello. What would you like to say?
I would like to say, without bad language,
Yes.
that when the wife and I finally got a taste of real democracy, it was down to us, the people, to decide something.
Yes.
We took it very, very seriously.
Yes.
To one in a lifetime chance.
Yes.
So when we looked into Brexit, we decided that the Good Friday Agreement would not allow us legally to have a Brexit. You'd have to completely redo the Good Friday Agreement.
I understand the research that you did, but not many people back in 2016 thought that we'd be leaving the customs union or the single market, including people who campaigned for Brexit. So you were quite ahead of the game there.
Yes, I think we
well
were.
done.
We took it very serious, did a lot of research.
Yes,
But what we noticed that happened, we were definitely made our mind up to vote against Brexit. But
Yes.
when we spoke to friends, family, people at work, we found that they were being put off by what they called Project Fear.
yes. As in, don't you worry about that. Don't you worry about that. Everything will be fine. Everything will be fine.
If you tell people not to talk about their job down the pub, guess what they're going to do?
Talk about their job.
The experts and government people who told us we mustn't vote Brexit, we actually saw it happening because we were trying to explain to people about the Good Friday Agreement.
Oh, welcome to
and
my
they were
world.
just saying, oh, no, that's just Project Fear.
Jacob Rees-Mogg doing that to me, Eddie. It was all right if you were just down the pub with your friends. I had a government minister potentially sitting there saying, oh, there's nothing to worry about at all. Everything will be fine. It's all a load of exaggeration and embellishment.
That's right. And that was the worst thing they could have done. You know.
Well, hang on. Listen, we're going to run out of time. But I'll give you 30 seconds. How else could you have made the Good Friday Agreement more comprehensible to people who were believing liars telling them that it wasn't going to be a problem at all? How would you have done it?
No, but we're in the worst of all worlds now. We've either got to go back into Europe on worse conditions than we had, or we're going to have to build a proper physical border in Ireland between the north and the south.
And I think my scariest contemplation is perhaps that the UK government would be morally corrupt enough and delinquent enough to almost push the European Union into having to face that dismal decision. I don't think they would ever do it, but I don't know what the alternatives are. Thank you, Eddie. I mean, chiefly for not swearing. That was a moment. I love live radio, but if a fella swears on the radio and then the other fella comes on next and you say, please don't repeat what the other fella just said, and he just repeats it straight away, those are the moments where you do wonder whether or not there's some sort of conspiracy underway against you. And the reason why a few of you are texting to say you didn't hear any swear words, that's because Keith has his finger hovering above the button. He was like Cool Hand Luke to Cool Hand Keith, we call him, hitting those buttons in the nick of time to avoid me being lumbered with yet another Ofcom complaint. Up next, it's all about the F word, but not that one. No, the other one. Yeah, that one. 3 minutes after 11. You know when you say, how are you, to someone, and you don't really care. So when I said, do I have any other problems with my microphone technique, I actually wasn't inviting people to tell me. Apparently I throw pens around a lot as well. That's problematic. Yesterday I had a little wooden fork in here that I was playing with, and on occasions apparently I tap the microphone with it, like a little drum. Des has been in touch. He says, ha, 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 ha. It's not your microphone technique that's the problem. It's your breathing technique. You need to listen back to... I've got to breathe, Des. You should listen back to yourself a bit more. You take breaths in the most bizarre, illogical and irritating places. Ha, 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 ha. Well, you can talk with all your ha's. And I can't now start saying to Irish callers, because a few people are telling me there's a lot more swearing on Irish talk radio than there is on British talk radio. So all my callers from the Republic perhaps are a bit more used to being able to stretch their sweary legs somewhat. If I start saying to all my Irish callers, please don't swear, I'll sound racist. I'll be accused of racism. I don't know why I bother. Anyway, it's the F word next, not the one from Father Ted. I bet you're breaking out. This one's unsigned. I bet you're breaking out in a cold sweat with your arms folded, wondering if you're allowed to say it. And I'm not going to say it. I don't think you are. Maybe you are allowed to say it if it was with an E, right? But anyway, we're not going to test Ofcom's patience with that one. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. Here's the thing. Yesterday, we talked about the F word in the context of an English government essentially putting pressure upon educational institutions to stop teaching English literature. I don't think it is a deliberately fascistic policy. I think it is more the case that they prioritise money over everything. I'll tell you shortly about the latest Conservative Party donor to be given a seat in the House of Lords, not long after there were rumours that he was quite disillusioned with Boris Johnson's leadership. It's great that, isn't it? If you've got a few million quid, bung a bit to the Tory party, make some noises about being unhappy with Boris Johnson's leadership, and you'll be in the House of Lords by tea time. I mean by that the commodification. So we talked yesterday about how other professions, when I was a younger man, or a boy even, that jobs which would have a degree of economic and social cachet, status if you like, but financial status as well as social status. And it popped up really because we were talking about barristers taking industrial action, junior barristers, because they earn such a relative pittance now, less than the minimum wage if you include the time they spend preparing for trials. And so they were a good example. And indeed so were junior doctors, I suppose, or I'm not across the economics of that, but teachers would once have enjoyed a higher economic and social status. So the only jobs that this government considers to be valuable are jobs that make money or move money or generate money or involve investment. And that scares me slightly, but that is the priority. That's what explains why you now have an English government essentially setting itself up in opposition to the teaching of English literature. The fact that they talk about culture wars, that brings the F word into it as well. And maybe I'm bending over backwards now to persuade myself that things aren't as scary as they might be, but I don't think that was actually fascistic. I think it is something that fascists do, but I don't think that the British government was doing it for the reasons that fascists do it for. I could be wrong. Don't call me on that one, because we're moving on to Liz Truss doing something else that I think fascists do. So here is Hilary Benn asking the Foreign Secretary and former rather good Remain campaigner, Liz Truss, what on earth she's playing at, essentially, with a bill that most legal advice, if not all, because as far as I can tell, the advice the government's received telling them that this is not illegal has come from lawyers who go to a different school. What on earth she's playing at. So you'll hear both from Hilary Benn and from Liz Truss here. And I want you to listen out for the P word, because I think that is a reason for us to talk about the F word.
I suspect that when she was campaigning for Britain to remain in the European Union, She never in a million years thought she'd be standing here proposing a bill of this sort. In the light of the comment she has just made about Article 16, why is the government not proposing to use the legal method to raise these questions with the European Union through the treaty that it signed, rather than one claiming necessity, when the Foreign Secretary is yet to give me a single example where the British government has claimed necessity for abrogating a treaty that it has negotiated and signed?
Well, Madam Speaker, the reason I'm putting this bill forward is because I'm a patriot and I'm a Democrat.
I found that quite scary, okay, and I know. I think I try too hard sometimes not to scare you. I don't. That's why the last 10 minutes of the last hour were so valuable and welcome, even though it was all very unintentional and unwanted. Because you have to break the bubble sometimes. You have to. That's why we spend our time together in the mornings, isn't it? We keep it human always keep it warm, even when we're talking about nasty stuff. But I do sometimes think that I hold back. I can't be throwing the F word around all the time, like your man in Sligo. I can't be going on about fascism all the time. I did it with Trump. It was one of the reasons I left the BBC, because I felt that Trump was very much going down a fascist path. And I couldn't really say so. Well, I couldn't say so here if I wanted to carry on working at the BBC. I remember sitting in a studio, at the Newsnight studio, and saying to an academic, has anybody ever employed fascistic tactics in campaign mode and not turned out to be fascistic in office? Has anyone ever done that? And there was somebody in Germany in the 1920s, no, in Austria in the 1920s, who possibly fitted that bill, but who also turned out to be something of an inspiration for Adolf Hitler. So it wasn't a very uplifting answer from the academic. And it's a weird word because it makes us think of Mussolini, or it makes us think of almost dystopian novels, makes us think of the Hunger Games. It doesn't make us think of the United Kingdom. But you heard the reaction in the House of Commons. I'm going to play you that clip again before I play you the next one. You heard the reaction in the House of Commons here, because I think Hilary Benn held up a mirror to Liz Truss. And she saw what we see. She saw a fraud, a liar. She saw somebody who is breaking international law in order to keep alive the myth that Brexit was in any way deliverable or desirable, or indeed that the Northern Ireland Protocol wasn't doing exactly what it was designed to do. It needs a tweak. Of course it needs a tweak. It needs a little bit of work. You've got a former chairman of the Conservatives in Northern Ireland telling Boris Johnson to leave it exactly as it is, just to give you an idea of how messed up the rhetoric has already become. I'll tell you what his name is in a minute. He's called Erwin Armstrong, former chair of the Conservative Party in Northern Ireland, has a simple message for the British Prime Minister. When it comes to the province's unique post-Brexit trade rules, don't ruin a good thing. He even campaigned for Britain to leave the European Union, the absolute lemon. But there are businesses that are struggling. They won't struggle forever because they'll rearrange their supply chains to come through Dublin or to come direct from the European Union. It cuts British suppliers out of the chain, which is bad news for British suppliers, but that's what everybody knew they were voting for, and that's what the British government has agreed to. So what Hilary Benn did was hold up a mirror and say to Liz Truss, crikey, when you were telling the truth back in 2016, I bet you never foresaw the day when you'd be pretending that you weren't breaking international law in order to keep the nonsensical balloon of Brexit inflated. And she looked in that mirror and she saw what she is. She saw what she's become. And that's why she then tried to describe something completely different. And she reached for a word that in this ludicrous era of confected culture wars is supposed to be like a super word. It's supposed to be like an Expelliarmus. It's supposed to have Hogwartian levels of magic. If somebody in the current government says that they are a patriot, it means that anybody disagreeing with them is not a patriot, even if the person doing the disagreeing is actually describing and pursuing the national interest, while the person using the word patriot is responsible for damaging the national interest and turning the United Kingdom into the only country in history to impose economic sanctions on itself. So listen to this again with my slightly pompous analysis. He holds up a mirror. She hates what she sees, so she describes something completely different.
I suspect that when she was campaigning for Britain to remain in the European Union, She never in a million years thought she'd be standing here proposing a bill of this sort. In the light of the comment she has just made about Article 16, why is the government not proposing to use the legal method to raise these questions with the European Union through the treaty that it signed, rather than one claiming necessity, when the Foreign Secretary is yet to give me a single example where the British government has claimed necessity for abrogating a treaty that it has negotiated and signed?
Well, Madam Speaker, the reason I'm putting this bill forward is because I'm a patriot and I'm a Democrat.
Now, this claim of necessity is almost certainly bogus. We'll be talking to Mark Elliott, who's a professor of public law and indeed the chair of the Faculty of Law at the University of Cambridge, in about half an hour. But it's all they've offered up is a false analysis of what the international law doctrine of necessity requires, which is really scary. And I don't know, I presume Liz Truss knows that. So instead of telling the truth, you accuse your opponent of being unpatriotic. That's what I'm hearing here. And it's not just me that found it disturbing. Simon Hoare is the Conservative chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee, and he was on his feet very, very quickly.
The Foreign Secretary knows that I have grave concerns about her bill. But could I ask her just to coolly reflect upon praying in aid patriotism as a defence of it? Is she seriously impugning the patriotism of colleagues across this House who have concerns about her bill? I find that a false conflation.
I was directly responding to the point of the honourable gentleman asking me why I had campaigned one way in the referendum, and now I'm working to make sure that the Brexit negotiation that we achieve works for the people of Northern Ireland.
Except, of course, that it already is. So she's lying every which way but Sunday now. So here is the question. And again, as with yesterday's conversation about the English government opposing the teaching of English literature, I want you to talk me out of the flirtation with the F word that is underway. But fascists do that. If you object to something that fascists are doing, they accuse you of being unpatriotic. Donald Trump did it a lot. What I want you to do is answer this question. Why do you think Liz Truss used the word patriot in the House of Commons yesterday? Obviously in this context, with reference to this debate and this ludicrous bill, the Northern Ireland Protocol bill. Why do you think she did that? And lest you think that this is me on my own personal hobby horse yet again, Theresa May effectively accused this bill of endangering the Good Friday Agreement, damaging Britain, and diminishing our status on the world stage. That's someone who was Prime Minister until just under 3 years ago, a Conservative Prime Minister describing this Conservative legislation in the most damning of terms. I think it's appalling that she didn't vote against it. The ones who abstained when they think their own government is breaking international law have to deal with their consciences. But that's the analysis of Conservative MPs, including a former Prime Minister and quite probably, having listened to Simon Hoare, the chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee. So when presented with, if you like, evidence of her own misbehaviour, let's be polite, why did Liz Truss use the word patriot in the House of Commons yesterday? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. My fear is that it is a fascistic tactic deliberately deployed in order to suggest that people who are pointing out that the government is breaking the law are somehow unpatriotic. Law breaking as patriotism has a horrible and well-documented history. Casting law breaking, international law breaking as a patriotic act is potentially disgusting, and I don't yet want to believe that that is what is happening in the House of Commons. So feel free to either talk me out of it or calmly confirm my worst fears on 0345 60973. And then the second bit of the question, how do you feel about that? So Julian Suffolk suggests it's a base appeal to people who are xenophobic and exceptionalist. Again, I hope Julie's wrong, but how do you feel about that? The idea that Liz Truss defends the breaking of international law, the probable breaking of international law, the consequential diminishment of the United Kingdom on the world stage, and obviously the jeopardising of the peace delivered by the Good Friday Agreement. And when asked why she is doing it, or is she surprised to find herself doing it, she replies she is doing it because she is a patriot. It is 19 minutes after 11, and it is not really a question that I would want to be asking in normal times, but these are, as we've often pointed out, not normal times. You then have, of course, as Alan and many others have reminded us, the line, I think, from Dr. Johnson, wasn't it, about patriotism being the last refuge of a scoundrel. And what Dr. Johnson meant by that was that it is what a scoundrel reaches for when the game is up. There's nothing wrong with patriotism per se, as long as you carefully police the line between patriotism and xenophobia or exceptionalism. But what Dr. Johnson, I think it was Dr. Johnson, should have checked, was talking about was, I think, what Liz Truss did yesterday. So look, best case scenario, she's a scoundrel. Worst case scenario, she's deploying fascistic tactics. What about Mussolini? The Mussolini quote somebody sent me a moment ago. Is it, I am passionately Italian? Let me find it for you, because it is very much on message, if you like, about the kind of thing we're talking about. Here it is. Yeah, I am desperately Italian. I am desperately Italian. I believe in the function of Latinity. Why are you doing these stupid, dangerous, illegal things, Liz Truss? Because I am desperately English. Or, the word she actually used, I am a patriot. John's in Droitwich. John, what made you pick up the phone?
I think it's possibly a little darker than you suggested, James.
Flipping heck, John. That's not what I'm looking for. Go on.
I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller, James.
Thank you.
It's kind of like the influx of this American ideology. A term patriot can mean really anything you want it to do, but mostly right-wing, as an excuse.
Exceptionalism or sort of... You shut down criticism by claiming that it's unpatriotic, even when the criticism is defending the national interest and the criticised are damaging it.
Indeed. Well said. Yep.
It's kind of scary. Why did she use it yesterday then?
I'm not sure. I think possibly because she'd got nothing else to say, James. It was just a very neat, quick answer, and again, in the way it has been used before, you can say, I'm a patriot, and that's it. Yeah. Finished. End of conversation.
It's a bit Faragey, really, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah, it's exactly that. Well said.
And they're going down that road. John, give my regards to the old country there, down in Worcestershire, just up the road from Kidderminster. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Staying in the West Midlands. Darren's in Birmingham. Darren, what's going on, do you think? So John thinks it's even darker than I fear. What do you think?
Well, I think usually your analysis is pretty spot on, but I think on this occasion you're actually overthinking it.
I hope so. Go on.
I think she's just incredibly stupid. You've only got
it's okay. Go on.
You've only got to look at the multiple interviews. Every time she's interviewed and she's moved off her spiel or a Tory script, to quote Mick Lynch, she can't answer. She had a car crash with Eddie Mair. She has a car crash on Channel 4. And I think that, obviously, Hilary Benn asked a very lucid question. She did. And she didn't know how to answer.
She's not stupid. She's bright enough to know that she's dishonest, you see. That I think... I mean this, because that's why I like my analogy of the mirror. She saw what Hilary Benn showed her in that mirror, and that's why she reached for. And Hugh points out, not just in this tweet, not just for the word patriot, but also for the word Democrat. So Hugh suggests laying the groundwork for the idea that those who don't disagree somehow don't believe in the country or its democratic function, which leads next to accusations of treason that needs crushing. And I want to believe that I'm overthinking it, but those are big words, Darren. Democrat and patriot.
Yeah. I mean they are, but I think she's just a shame. I mean, she's like a lot of the Tory MPs. I mean, a lot of the 2019 intake are basically UKIPers who switched to blue to get elected. And I think she's just a shameless opportunist, and she'll just jump on any bandwagon to
and that's what worries me. That's why, as I said yesterday, the motivation isn't fascistic, but the tactic is. So she's not sitting there thinking...
Yeah, possibly,
But how can I defend... If you take opportunism as the key word here, how can I defend the situation in which my blind ambition has propelled me to, and which my shameless opportunism has put me in? Here's Hilary Benn holding up a mirror in which she sees shameless opportunism and blind ambition and abandonment of principle and integrity. How can I possibly counter that? I know I'll accuse them of being unpatriotic.
Yeah, possibly, but I mean, she's just another one, isn't she, that's been promoted way above her ability.
Well, maybe. I mean, she stands quite well in the company of the current cabinet, actually. And I'm not just saying that because she did understand the idiocy of Brexit back in 2016. I think she's many things, but I don't think she's stupid. I think that she is possibly rendered stupid looking by having to stick to the script that you referred to, by having to say things about pork markets, which don't make any sense at all. But well played, though. You've got some love from Paul. He goes, Darren is caller of the week, and it's only Tuesday. I didn't see the stupid coming on the horizon when you said I'm overthinking it. I thought you were going to mount a defence of her, and then you went straight in for the stupid. 25 after 11 is the time. Sarah's in Crystal Palace. Sarah, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I have no particular qualifications to talk about this. I'm a humble doctor who happens to be on annual leave, so I have the chance to listen to you live.
Lovely.
But I'm really glad that you've used the F word because it's a little bit overdue. The language that Liz Truss has used is no surprise. They've been using overtly fascist language and techniques since 2016. Up to and including courting overtly fascist people like Farage. Okay,
I'm sure he'd dispute that for the record.
Well, a schoolmaster at Dulwich wouldn't.
No, true.
So, look at every technique they've used, and I'd like to refer to Umberto Eco's essay on fascism. Yeah. Of course, Umberto Eco had first-hand experience of fascist Italy. And his thoughts on this are really, really important. But he made 14 points, 14 elements of fascism, and almost every single one you can see in Britain today. Now, I don't have the essay in front of me, but from memory, if we think about, othering, exploitation, and even drawing on traditionalism, any disagreement is treason. They draw on populism. They talk about, and I quote, the will of the people. Yeah. They create enemies, both strong and weak. The EU, for example, or the Irish government. Yeah. And also the impoverishment of language Refugees and vocabulary.
Weak. Yeah. I haven't got them off the top of my head either, but I think he wrote that someone said that patriotism is the last refuge of cowards. Those without moral principles usually wrap a flag around themselves, and that's essentially what she did yesterday. Here's the thing, and I hope this doesn't sound like quibbling or indeed... avoiding the issue. I don't think that they are doing it for the traditional reasons. I don't know why other regimes that have gone down these paths went down those paths, but I always presumed that there was a destination in mind. I think that they believed in the purity of race, for example. There's no way Liz Truss believes in the purity of race. So she's deploying fascistic tropes opportunistically rather than ideologically. I don't know if that makes it any better or worse or neither, but I derive a modicum of comfort from that thought, as in they don't really mean it. They're just doing it because Brexit is such an almighty mess and horror show.
I'm not sure that it makes it any better.
No.
I suspect you are correct, but the Tory ideology, and I have a bias against, Tory politics in general, but Tory ideology is all about power. It's all about power and being popular. There is no real ideology except, installing in power, which is why I'm so surprised they haven't, shown Boris Johnson the door.
Well, their calculation is still that he is their best chance of retaining power, even if it looks less and less convincing and less likely. I do think the absence of a contender after the metaphorical kneecapping of Rishi Sunak is probably what saved his bacon in the last confidence vote, and I think if there was one tonight, he'd probably lose it. So again, he's had a bit of good fortune there on two fronts.
I suspect so, but the by-elections would tell you a different story, that actually voters are now starting to come together.
I think you'll find... Hang on a minute. I think you'll find that Priti Patel said they'd had an absolutely brilliant couple of results last week.
Yeah, okay. I mean, let's face it, Priti Patel's analysis is somewhat rudimentary.
Very diplomatically put, Sarah. Your bedside manner is exemplary. I think. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of your national leave. Thank you for everything you do as a doctor. Next time we talk, it'll probably be about mooted industrial action by your profession, joining the long line of workers not really prepared to put up with the current terms and conditions being inflicted upon them by an increasingly, obviously incompetent government. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A good question from Austin. I wonder how many times the word patriot has been used in Parliament before. I wonder where the origins for this language come from. I think probably Steve Bannon. Is Liz Truss now reading from his playbook? That's from Austin in Hampshire. I'm not suggesting, and again, I'll pick up this from Tom in Guildford, so accidental fascism is better than deliberate fascism, is it, James? No, it's just as bad. Yeah, I know you're right. I possibly didn't explain myself very well. I just think that accidental fascism is probably easier to reverse and undo than deliberate fascism, but you know me. I am Mr. Naivety sometimes. My faith in the fundamental decency of people is a curse that I carry into almost all encounters with people who don't generally turn out to deserve that presumption. 11:30 is the time. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headline. It is 33 minutes after 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We'll have a look at the legality or otherwise of the Northern Ireland Protocol in the company of one of the country's leading legal academics in about 15 minutes time or so. Before that, I don't do this lightly. I do want you to know that, and if I get it wrong, I'll take my medicine. I really will. But introducing the F word to discussions about British politics is scary, right? We did it yesterday, very, very cautiously, by wondering why an English government was setting itself up in opposition to the teaching of English literature. And I'm doing it today with Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary's decision to defend what is almost certainly illegal policy making by the British government on the grounds of being a patriot, to use the word that she used. I don't know that my defence of opportunism versus deliberateness is going to work, actually, now that you've had a chance to run your eye over it. Let me give you some of the criticism coming in. Your analogy of opportunism versus intent is dangerous. If you operate a machine gun without knowing what you're doing, I would argue that you're more dangerous than someone who knows what they're doing. Intent has consequences. Deniability is strong within this group. That's unsigned. I don't know why. It's really good. I'd be claiming the credit for that if I'd written it. Simon is in Sutton Coldfield. He writes, Liz Truss claims to be a patriot as cover for disingenuousness. And then he does rather a good impression of her, which, considering this is a text, is a remarkable achievement. But deft deployment of full stops will convey what Simon does next. That is a disgrace, he writes. This government has no idea. It was like she was in the room, wasn't it? This government has no ideology. They are accidental fascists. They are political alchemists, except their fool's gold has been created by mixing populism with nationalism. If champagne was invented by mistake, this is some very poor champagne. Using fascistic tropes opportunistically is worse in many ways because they are flippantly inviting true fascism into the space they create. This is exactly what Trump did in America, and now look where that country has descended. Those are all superb texts, which reminds me yet again that I should read out texts more often. Mark's in Kenilworth. Mark, what's going on?
Yeah, hello, James.
Hello.
Just on the Liz Truss patriotism thing. I think I've got this theory, and basically what she was saying it ties in with the electoral cynicism as practiced by the Tories, and I think what they're going to be doing is utilising the patriot argument in relation to the EU and the Northern Ireland Protocol. They're going to be using that in a potential upcoming election, and as the rumours go, Boris is interested in, as they say, maybe having one in October when this argument will be continuing to run, and he will be seeking to appeal to red wall voters.
And that becomes the weapon. Then it is unpatriotic to oppose reality. It is unpatriotic to refuse to go along with our denial of reality, whether they see it like that or not. That's clearly what's happening. And history. As my texters are saying, if they stumble into this through opportunism and self-interest, there's no comfort to be drawn from that, because in some ways it's even scarier than doing it deliberately and ideologically.
Yeah, but the main thing is with them is that they will do anything in order to get in at the next election, and it's just I don't think she's a fascist. I think she's a Tory.
No.
And it's just.
But she's doing what a fascist would do. You shout unpatriotic, or you say I am a patriot. Then the inference is clearly that you're not, or that Hilary Benn isn't. And that's really ugly and dangerous. And actually, someone's texted to say it reminded me of that Jonathan Gullis arguing with Mick Lynch when he was reduced to just shouting, veterans, essentially accusing Mick Lynch of being an unpatriotic traitor as well. So you don't care about veterans then, he said, or something utterly bovine.
And it puts me in mind of, I was down the pub, right, and before the referendum, and I was talking to a person who was saying that the reason why people are not going to vote Labour in the election, is basically that Labour are unpatriotic and working class people, amongst many things, very patriotic,
I think it was easy to make that stick with Jeremy Corbyn in the chair, they're desperate. They're desperate to make it stick with Keir Starmer in the chair, which is going to be altogether harder, isn't it? Because he doesn't generally suggest that we send poison to Russia to ask them if it was theirs, instead of trusting our own security services to do the work, and and such like. So anyway, no, it's all good.
Anyway, James.
Yes, you take care, mate. Thanks for that. I'm cracking on. 11:38 is the time. Nick's in Ruislip. Nick, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I wanted to say that the whole thing about coming out of Europe was that it was sold on the word, we need our sovereignty.
It wasn't, Nick. Sorry, I've been a right old pain in the proverbials today. That didn't pop up until years after the referendum result came in. It was only after they realised that the German car industry weren't going to come galloping to our rescue. They didn't need us more than we needed them. We weren't going to get amazing trade deals with the rest of the world. The European Union wouldn't let us keep all the good stuff while getting rid of the foreigners. I promise you, the word sovereignty didn't appear in the referendum, ever.
No, I appreciate it didn't appear in the referendum, but it was used constantly.
In the run-up to the 2019 election, after the reality of Brexit began to land, people had to be given something that they could pretend they had voted for when all the stuff they actually voted for disappeared over the horizon, and that's when sovereignty became a thing. So-called sovereignty.
But they also used about Ed Miliband's father, that he wasn't.
That was part of Paul, soon-to-be Lord Dacre's editorship of the Daily Mail, when they called Ed Miliband's father, dead father, I should stress, the man who hated Britain. God, that's a timely reminder. So in some ways, the direction of... Well, yeah, but I mean, the Daily Mail has a long history of flirtations with fascism. I don't think that the Conservative government does, until relatively recently. Roddy's in Glasgow. Roddy, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Roddy.
Nice to speak to you again.
Likewise.
I'm going for the word P, Prime Minister. I think Liz Truss is angling for the time when Johnson will go.
Yes.
And therefore is making to be honest, a response to Hilary Benn. I don't think she could construct an argument.
No, she couldn't.
I think she just blurted out the first word that came into her head, and a good word for the Red Wall.
I hope
and
so. I hope so
voters.
Solely in the sense that it was that then you have the sort of defence of accident as opposed to deliberateness.
No. It's a bit of both.
Okay.
In other words, what the hell do I do? Right, patriot. That's a good word.
If in doubt. That's what he meant. That's what he meant. That's what he means by the last refuge, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got nowhere else to go.
And it's the maintenance of power. I think every aspect of political agenda, domestic and foreign, at the moment, is geared to the Tories. Well, sorry, they're not really the Conservative Party anymore. Maintaining power. Johnson talks about going for a third term. They are fearful of losing to the Labour Party, and I think personally, although the Lib Dems did very, very well, I think it could well be a Labour landslide.
Do you?
In a year or so's time. Yeah, I think if the population truly look in the mirror.
Yes.
And let's face it, the British people do have to look in the mirror.
Do they?
Because we've never really been defeated in the past. We've never known what it is to lose. And at the end of the day, is there enough of the majority of the British population in a first-past-the-post system to clear this lot out.
I just don't know that the polls aren't moving in that. I mean, there is a sense, I think, among the more optimistic opponents of this government that Keir Starmer's slow and steady approach may pay dividends at some as yet unspecified point in the future. But you know that you've got to hold your finger, you've got to cross your fingers pretty tightly to be holding on to that now. When you look at just how awful the current government is and just how small the lead in the polls is.
That's true. But I guess when you go back to, I know I'm going back way back to 1945, nobody expected Churchill to lose that election as a landslide.
No, that's
the people are quite smart. Eventually, you hope that the game is up on the Brexit argument. But I think what we're finding now is an attack on democracy. There was an article in the Glasgow Herald by Neil Mackay recently, a superb article. And he said, you only know what you're doing if you have access to the truth. So freedom requires truth. And so to smash freedom, you must smash the truth. And he made a reference to Hannah Arendt, the chronicler of totalitarianism.
The banality of evil.
Warned that those who wish to control us must transform their lies into our new reality. To believe the lies of others is to surrender your own witnessed reality, your truth, to the fantasies of another. Such surrender is no less than selling yourself into mental slavery.
You mentioned that, and I will bring Jacob Rees-Mogg back into the conversation at this point because he tweeted yesterday, The Guardian thinks the EU is dangerous, and this was in response to a story in which everybody from the Food Standards Authority to the British Veterinary Association to the NFU boss Minette Batters all warned of their concerns that the failure to check food coming into this country could cause some major problems and crises, and Jacob Rees-Mogg elected to portray that story as the Guardian thinking the EU is dangerous. That is the smashing of reality before your very eyes on Twitter.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Roddy, thank you. A little more on that particular story, because Pete Foster, our friend at the Financial Times, has done some sterling work on this already. There's already been a warning from the Food Standards Authority that the pig industry is worried about white vans of illegal pig meat entering from Romania, where there is currently a problem with African swine fever. That's the point about checks. You go for the open door. You remember Jacob Rees-Mogg saying a few months ago that they wouldn't be implementing checks on food coming in because it turned out that it was going to cost a fortune. Funny that, isn't it? And so you're essentially advertising the fact that there will be no checks. So if you've got a lorry load of dodgy pig meat full of African swine fever or whatever it's called, where are you going to try and offload it? In the countries where there are stringent checks on food, or on the countries where there aren't? You get it into this country, relabel it, because you're never going to sell it as dodgy pig meat. You relabel it in a country with low regulation, and who knows what you'll be having for your dinner this time next year. We know this is an accident waiting to happen because it's an accident that has already happened before. That's the chief executive of the National Pig Association, a British trade body. But Jacob Rees-Mogg pretends that it is the Guardian describing the EU as... Maybe he just doesn't understand it. We're there again, aren't we? Does he truly not understand anything? You know that the nonsense he was talking about the Dartford Tunnel last week